I'd like to open the meeting of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority, the JPA Board of Directors meeting. It's Wednesday, November 14th, 2018. We'll start with a roll call vote, please.
Yes, good evening. Chair
Sorry, a roll call.
Yes. Chair Corrigan.
Here.
Alternate
barely.
Director Inda.
I'm here.
Director Tate.
I'm here.
Director Smith.
Here.
Director Miller.
Here.
Director Sinks.
Here.
Director Rennie.
Here.
Director Gibbons.
Here.
Director Bruins.
Here.
Director Craig.
Here.
Thank you. I will note Vice Chair Abby Koga, Director Harney, and Director Cortese are absent.
Thank you. Now is the time where we open the meeting for public comment. If there's any members of the public here who wish to make public comment on any item on tonight's agenda that is not on tonight's agenda, you're welcome to do so now. You can have 2 minutes at the podium. We just ask you that you fill out a speaker card. I see Bruce, who is familiar with our procedures. Hello and welcome.
Thank you very much. The thing I wanted to talk to you tonight about is the Climate Reality Project. This is Al Gore's project to train thousands of ordinary citizens to inform their friends and neighbors and communities about the threat of climate change and what we can do about it. Has created a Santa Clara County chapter that has had 3 meetings so far. Dozens of people have come to the meetings, and I believe hundreds are on the mailing list. And the organization is about to embark on its first project. And that project is to encourage all the cities in Santa Clara County to measure and report their greenhouse gas emissions every year. Now, I know some cities already do it, Los Altos Hills being the one that's been doing it the longest, I think 10 or more years in Los Altos Hills. Mountain View is committed to doing it, but I know that many others measure every 5 or every 10 years. So I expect that you'll be hearing in the future from members of the Climate Reality Project Santa Clara County chapter, and I hope that you'll be supportive of this because you can't bend the carbon curve unless you can plot the carbon curve, and if you only measure every 5 years, your curve is a bunch of straight lines. So let's get together and fix that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to address the JPA board tonight? Hearing none and seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and move on to an adoption of a resolution commending Director Steve Tate for his dedicated service to SVCE. Steve, I want to just give you a personal shout out, having worked with you on the library board as well. Your dedication to all of these entities is commendable, and I know your city is going to miss you as well as SVCE. I have a few things for you, including a resolution and a plaque. And what I'd like to suggest is at the end of tonight's meeting, we all join together and take a photograph in front of the dais here. Okay? I'm going to bring him on over, just so I don't damage him. Steve, thank you very, very much. Oh, yes.
Being part of the group has been a real experience when you get on a group with a different kind of subject than you've ever dealt with before, and the first thing they tell you is you have to go to a class on a Saturday morning just to understand the terminology. I was a little bit afraid that we were flying at too low a level, and over the next few months I learned why we had to be at that level and how important it was and how dedicated all of you are to the cause, and it's really been great working with you all. I'll miss you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know. I'm open to offers.
He's coming to the meetings anyway. There's going to be a seat right.
There you go.
Steve, I know I speak for all 12 of our cities. Thank you for your service to JPA here and representing your city's interest by being part of our board of directors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. The consent calendar. I know.
I think we'll both have the adoption of the resolution though, first.
Oh, sorry.
Board Member Tate.
Thank you. So I need a motion to
So
adopt.
moved.
Second.
Now a roll call vote, or can we?
A voice vote is fine.
A voice vote. So all in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Okay, good. Good, because I already gave it to him. I didn't understand how formal this was. Thank you. Okay, now the consent calendar. Are there any items on the consent calendar that any member would like to pull? Hi, Liz.
Yes, hello, yes. Item 1E, please.
1E. Okay, fantastic. I know that Greg would like to make some comments.
Yes, just would be brief comments before we go to the consent calendar. Item 1D, and this statement is just required by a new change to the Brown Act, and it concerns the amendment number 1 to the CEO contract. I just need to summarize the financial terms of it for you. And the changes to be made by amendment number 1 include an increase in the annual salary for the CEO from $275,000 to $290,000. There is an increase in paid time off.
Greg,
There's some concern that we can't hear
your
you.
mic might not be on, which makes me worry that it might not be on the tape clearly.
Yes.
It is. Maybe just put it closer and go again.
Yeah, it's on now, so thank you. Let me
Sorry.
try that one more time. Is that better now?
Yes.
Yes. So again, we're summarizing the changes made by amendment number 1 to the CEO contract with respect to the financial terms. And the first item is an increase in the annual salary from $275,000 to $290,000. There's an increase in the paid time off from 200 to 280 hours per year. That'll be effective on February 19, 2009. And then there's also a one-time grant of paid time off of 80 hours for this year that would be taken prior to February 19 of 2019. And at this point now, we can just go ahead and move on the entire consent calendar other than item 1E, which will be taken separately.
Yeah, if I may, I realize that my question on 1E was answered, so I need not pull that.
Okay. Anyone else have any items they want to pull or ask any other questions? Then with that, I'd like a motion to receive the entire slate.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none and moving on. So now we're on the regular item, the CEO report. Garish will be making that report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to call your attention to some of the press that we have received around the solar storage contracts. It's in the CEO report. There's been extensive press on what a positive investment this is. It's forward-looking. It talks about our financial stability, etc. So I just wanted to highlight that for you because the board has worked on this for a long time. And I don't have anything more in terms of CEO report other than having Hillary Staver come on up and provide an update on legislative and regulatory affairs.
Hi, welcome, Hillary.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'll switch the usual order around tonight, and first of all, say thank you for approving item 1E. We are very excited to have Aaron Reed and Associates on board for the 2019 session. As you know, it's going to be the first time that SVCE has had a professional lobbyist in Sacramento, and we're really excited to have them both from the perspective of working together as part of the broader CCA advocacy community and also helping us develop SVCE's sort of unique profile in Sacramento. So that is a firm that we're very excited to be working with, and I thank you for approving that. And then we are going to be doing the next meeting of the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee on November 30th. So that'll be an opportunity to kind of do our last direct planning before the session starts in early January. So we're getting started on that, and in the meantime, on the Cal CCA side and the broader community, the planning for the top priorities continues. So we'll have some news on that in late November as well. So switching over to the regulatory side, the biggest thing this month was the November 7th ERA update. ERA stands for Energy Resource Recovery Account. And as I've mentioned before, this is the proceeding this is kind of the typical annual number crunching proceeding where we get the PCIA values for next year calculated. So in short, this process has been it's been busy. This schedule is designed for an unchanging methodology that's basically just plugging in numbers. And between when the PCIA decision was passed on October 11th and when we got that update on November 7th, they not only went through the usual sort of plugging in numbers, but also had to figure out for the first time how to convert the methodology direction in the PCI decision into an actual template that we can use to calculate these rates. So this was the first look that we got at the new PCIA methodology output. And in short, we are poring over that, analyzing the impacts that it's going to have. First take is that we are not expecting major changes necessary to the budget for next year that you approved in September, but we will not know the official numbers until December, probably around December 30th. So we'll continue our analysis there, and as you know, February is the opportunity to make changes, but at the moment, it's looking like pretty much falling within the scenarios that we've been modeling, and we're not expecting major changes. So that is the main item for this month. I will not be here for this meeting in December, so I thought I would give you just a quick overview of what we're expecting in the next month, because that has inadvertently turned out to be a little bit of a recap also of the major issues we've been facing on the regulatory side this year. So things we're expecting in December are a proposed decision in the resource adequacy proceeding. What we've got at stake here is whether local RA is going to be in the future procured by a centralized buyer. So there are financial implications there, and also kind of procurement philosophy and regulatory paradigm implications about where we're headed as the supply sector continues to diversify. So we'll look at that. On integrated resource planning, the CPUC is moving forward with with calculating the aggregated emissions impacts of all of the load-serving entities' integrated resource plans statewide. So we're expecting either late December or early January to see that. And that's kind of where the rubber meets the road on the first cycle of integrated resource planning in California. So we'll basically see if this, if it worked as intended. Then we've got the second phase of the PCIA proceeding. We're expecting that to start in early to mid-December. That's where we'll be looking at kind of the long-term structural solutions that we could use to redistribute some of PG&E's or some of the IOU's excess resources back into the market. And then finally, we should get a proceeding that starts the implementation of SB 237 and the expansion of direct access in the state. So overall, next month, we're going to get a little bit of pretty much all of the major issues that we've been working on over the course of the year. And as I think has probably become clear already, overall, we're looking at increasing complexity in the regulatory landscape and in the economic landscape, and a lot of uncertainty about kind of what's going forward in both of those areas. So we have kind of hit we're past as an institution the setup point. We've passed that initial phase, but we now are going to be switching into how we can adapt to this changing landscape. And I'll call out the next item that you're going to be looking at tonight, because we are bringing on additional resources to help us take a comprehensive look at how these changes are going to impact us and how we can be best positioned to adapt to them most effectively as we go forward. So with that, well, I'll stop there. Are there any questions?
Any questions? No.
All right.
Hillary, thank you.
Thank you. I will see you in January.
Okay, terrific. Any questions for Girish about his report? Yes. Howard.
Just a question, as I looked at this, on the upgrades and opt-outs table that was thrown in there. Just, the question's sort of rudimentary. Have we gone after the opt-outs, particularly on the residential side? You know, maybe sliced and diced it, how many solar customers opted out? Those seem like people that we should be able to send a postcard to and say, hey, you'd be better off with us again, why don't you reconsider?
I'm going to ask Don Bray to address that.
And I know we're working the large accounts, the heavy hitters, but
Yeah.
there is 8,500 people going away from a 6% discount. Makes me wonder, you know, these seem like people that may be confused. Maybe we could help them with a little postcard.
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer is no, we have not made a major campaign out of approaching that 8,500. We're going to be looking at exactly what that number is, and I've explained this before, but the the 8,500 is how many people have opted out along the way. A number of those people that opted out have since moved away and may have been replaced by customers who have joined us when presented with the option moving in. So that number needs to be trued up a little bit. We have a way of doing that now that we've got everyone on board, Milpitas included. But it's a good question. We can be looking at that, over the course of this year in terms of reaching out to them specifically. We have been focusing our efforts on the top handful of
On the
commercial.
people that matter more to the business. I worry about having the hearts and minds. In particular, I know when we started up, there was some confusion with solar customers. We put a lot of energy into trying to explain to them this was a good place to be. And I actually know some solar customers who've opted out, and I've since had to talk to them, and they've opted back in. So I was wondering if there was a way to slice and dice this, that we could just have a little small communication to them, rather than trying to do all 8,500 at once.
I think
Anything you do is great.
I think it's a good suggestion.
Perfect. That was all it was a small suggestion. Thank you.
Any other? Yeah.
I just want to make a comment. In the media section of his report, there's 2 pages of media articles and these recognizing our solar plus storage. It just really shows what a big deal this is. These two projects are the largest hybrid energy storage facilities in California. I mean, we're really being a leader here. It's showing that we're committed to the grid innovation, and I think that's really something to note. That this ability to add basically ability to add the storage allows us to use the solar when it's most needed. It helps us be cleaner because we can use it in the evening when solar is not available. It allows us to buy it during the day when it's cheap and put it back on the grid when it's more expensive. So I think this is a really big deal. I wanted to highlight that.
I appreciate that. I think really to capitalize on that, the investments we're making as a result really are industry leading and arguably leading the country in a way that we all need to be looking forward, right? So thank you for
Just
making
one more
it happen.
comment.
Oh yeah, Rod.
So the one thing I note is we got a lot of specialty publications, but the major news sources in the Bay Area that most consumers would know about, I don't see the Mercure, the Chronicle. I don't see any television coverage. Did we reach out to those groups? I suppose we send out a press release broadly. I'm just wondering if we have any relationship with these journalists that could, for all of this great work, you'd like our customers to know.
Yes. Hi, good evening, directors. Pamela Leonard, Communications Manager. I have reached out to press contacts in the Bay Area, and unfortunately with the timing of our release and the elections, this was something that did not take precedence, and now we have the fires. So with the limited staffing in the Bay Areas, the attention has been a little bit difficult, but I'm continuing to follow up with our main contacts, and the only local coverage we received so far was from the Gilroy Dispatch, Morgan Hill Times, and San Benito also covered. So I'm following up with those contacts, and also I just would like to let you know that SVCEA is planning to also do a large release, press release, because our projects have led to long-term procurement of CCAs past 2,100 megawatts, and so they're using that as an opportunity from our projects as well, so we would maybe get some additional coverage from that.
Yeah, I appreciate us repackaging this, finding something new. We could, whatever it takes, right? I think it would serve us well if we could get some coverage in what I'll call mainstream media rather than specialty pubs. Thanks.
Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. I am happy to see the grant update for the community outreach, and I noted that there was a meeting scheduled on November 1st. So I wondered briefly how that went and when we might get a report on what the results were of the grants.
That's me again. So we had a great kickoff meeting. We did some level setting for the group since many of these agencies haven't had much experience. They're not necessarily just focused on environmental causes. So they're really enthusiastic and really excited to be able to communicate our benefits to communities that traditionally haven't been as easy to access for us. So we handed out all of our materials, so they're ready to go. We've already had a couple of them present at events that they've already had scheduled. And so when we are going to be able to communicate all of our new updates in 2019, they're ready to go. And so that's going to be a really great resource for us, as well as learning a lot from them, from their constituents and or their members that they serve.
Terrific. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you both. Do I need public comment on this item? Does anybody here want to make a comment? No, hearing none and seeing none. We're going to move on to item, where are we? Three. Item three. Adopt a resolution to authorize the chief executive officer to execute a service agreement with several entities. Thank you. Hello, Monica.
Good evening, directors. I'm Monica Padilla, Director of Power Resources. So I think Hillary did a good job of introducing kind of the need for this item tonight, but as you all know, things are getting a little more difficult with what we're having to do in-house. And while we are trying to expand our bandwidth, it's going to take a while for us to get there. And in the meantime, we've kind of identified this need for some real specialized and expertise consulting services. Most recently, we had an opportunity to look very closely to how we might be able to offer certain types of services to a typical type of customer. And so we enlisted the help of some consultants on an interim basis to help us explore how we might go about doing that. And we quickly found that we were very kind of not equipped to do a lot of this stuff in-house, and discovered that the best way to maybe meet some of these challenges that we'll be facing is to outsource a lot of this stuff to some very specialized consultants. So with that, we selected 3 consultants, Hanover Strategy Advisors, Flynn Resources Consultants, and Ascend Analytics, to be under what we call these master consultant agreements. And so the idea there is that we would be enabled with these consultants. We're not guaranteeing them any kind of work at this point, but we would have an authority, if you were to pass this resolution tonight, to be able to spend up to $1 million with one or more of these consultants in aggregate for a term up to 3 years. And those agreements are actually included in draft form in your packet as well, but the resolution would also give authority to the CEO to finalize and execute those agreements subject to kind of non-substantive changes. So the idea also is that when we come to you every year with the budget, that there would be a request to fund these consultant agreements as part of the budget process. And then in July, we would return with all of our consultant agreements with an update on the expenditures, the types of projects that they provided for us, and what dollar authority remains under these agreements. So with that, I don't have a presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, are there questions? Yeah, hi, Howard.
Sure, maybe I sort of missed it, how you explained it. Right, it's $1 million, 3 years, and we'll review it every year. But do we really have like the ability to say, no, we've had enough of these consultants? Or is the $1 million spent once we approve it tonight?
Well, you would give the authority to the CEO to spend up to $1 million, but so in a sense, he could spend it all in 1 year with this authority.
It looks like the preliminary estimates for next year would not exceed $200,000.
Right. Exactly. We don't intend to spend all $1 million in 1 year. In fact, it's...
So is there a reason why we wouldn't just do it every year and authorize, $250 or something this year? Why are we authorizing $1 million all up front?
So if I may.
Yes, Liz.
So I asked a very similar question earlier on of our executive director, and correct me if I'm wrong here. what I understood is that I think we all know the world has really bounced a bit for us. And that the idea of hiring expertise in-house doesn't make sense. We need really specialized expertise, and there are these organizations that staff has come across that are really good. The question, as I understood it, is we don't really know what we need right now, or in the next 6 months, or in the next 12 months. So this frankly, gives the staff the ability to be agile, which is what we need to do. I was a little uncomfortable with the amount of money and the fact that it was over 3 years, and I said, if it's over 3 years, why don't we just do it in increments? So I thought the response was a valid one, given where we are. We don't want to have staff have contracts for $200,000 or $20,000 and having to come back to us every month. So this is an aggregate approach to a dynamic situation. So that's how I understood the answer.
That's correct, and if I may add to it also, part of the resolution also says that if we get additional consultants, and I may actually want a couple more to be available to us, we'll bring that back to the board. So for example, if I'm going to bring 2 more consultants, we'll have an amended resolution. I wouldn't expect the dollar amount to change, but now we have, say, 5 consultants that we can use for specialized tasks. So it is a balance. It's exactly what Director Gibbons said, of how often do we come back to you, and we are going into a place where I don't know exactly how much I'm going to utilize these folks over the next 12 to 18 months. It's going to depend on several aspects: what happens in regulatory proceedings and what happens in legislative proceedings, what happens with our customer base. Part of what we are looking for is going to our customers with direct access with some customized products. I don't know what the response rate's going to be, and depending on what we find out once we get out there, I may use one consultant more than the other. And
if I may, one of the things that Monica said, which I thought was relevant here, is that it's not an open-ended money just floating around someplace. We are going to get annual updates with the budget process. So we're going to know who the money's been going to, how it's been spent, how much money is left, what's been accomplished. And the CEO has the ability to cancel the contracts at any point. So I felt there were enough checks and balances on what we're being asked to do at this point.
Can I add also that as part of that budget process, you will have the ability to approve the budget, which would include the consultant funding. And so if the board does not approve the funding for the consultants, then in a sense we can't use them.
Yes, Rod.
Yeah, I'll echo some of Liz's remarks. I also asked about this and the amount, and I think nothing less than our business with commercial accounts that may have the option to go to direct access in the future is what's on the table. If we wait or we, consider other options, I think the challenge for us is we may not have the opportunity again. So I think this $1 million leverages potentially a lot of revenue that we ought to work to hold on to with a coherent program. And so I'm in support of entrusting our CEO to make this decision on behalf of us.
Are there any other questions or comments from directors? I'd like to open up for public comment too. Anyone? Yes, hi, Tony.
Yeah, I think I'm in support of the item. I think the one thing that I'd like to just tweak a little bit is when you discuss bringing back a tally of the contracts that get cut, I think you mentioned bringing it back once every year, which might be a little too far. In other organizations and groups that I've worked with before, they've brought back or had an item on their agenda every single month with a tally of the different contracts that get cut. Nothing to really discuss if we don't really want to, but it's an item that's on the agenda that says these are the contracts that got cut and for what amount. So I don't know if that's something that can be folded into the process here.
Did I hear you say the contracts got cut? Oh, you mean how much was
So
spent?
how much is spent for these contracts, correct?
I think we provide this in aggregate in the treasurer's report, right, Don? I would say in terms of, maybe as a suggestion, oversight, there's a balance between, because at the end of the day, Eric and Don, they're going to be doing this. It's just one more thing that they're going to be doing. I'm not sure once a month is actually going to be adding any value. I would say
Twice a year,
once
maybe.
in, we would think once a year, but maybe once in 6 months. And I'd also suggest a threshold. We have, because we outsource so much, because we are a very small agency and new agency, I'd also suggest contracts above $100,000. We report once in 6 months. We'll give you a report basically saying, here's the expenditure, here's what we got out of it. So just a short summary that we'll put into the CEO report.
It's on the consent calendar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or would you be satisfied if it happened either annually or biannually?
Yeah, that's fine. I just another way of reporting back to the directors other than just once a month, because what I know as we get going really fast here, there's going to be a lot of expenditures coming out. I understand that, and I'm really in support of it. I don't want you to think that I don't support this, because I understand the agility that's needed. But having just a know-how or an idea of what's going on, rather than waiting till the end of the year to say, oh, we've spent 900,000 of the 1 million,
right.
Would be something that would be beneficial for our agency and hopefully for the rest of the directors here.
I'd be happy to do that and actually suggest maybe do it as part of the CEO report. We provide lots of data and operational updates to the CEO report, and we can highlight it at that point. And do it twice a year.
Yeah, I think of I'm going to try to summarize some of the concerns and perhaps just say, as part of your CEO report, if you sense that we have had a large expenditure that far exceeds what we're anticipating across this 3-year span, for instance, we suddenly are $500,000 out, and we're only 4 months into this 3 years, we certainly want to hear about it.
Yep.
Otherwise, I think we'd be perfectly satisfied with the updates twice a year as part of the mid-year update financials, and then, of course, the annual budget discussions. Liz?
I'd just like to tie it back to what Director Smith said earlier about getting reports back on the grants. One of the things that we as electeds often comment to you about is we are very sensitive to how money is being spent and the tracking of money and the products produced by the money. We need to see it's well spent. So everything that we're saying here is consistent with what we've said before. Help us understand where we are financially, the quality product resulting, the grants resulting. So as you go through various phases, just keep in mind that what we need to be sure that we can explain is that the money is being spent well and tracked well. And I think that was your point earlier.
If there's no other comments up here, I'll open it for public comment. Is there anyone here from the public who'd like to make a comment? All right, hearing and seeing none, I'm going to bring it back up here for any final discussion before. Yes.
So again, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. What we're doing is earmarking $1 million that can be spent in the manner described here with the firms that are described here. And that through the annual budget, we will actually do the true appropriation of the funds. So in a particular budget year, we may say we're appropriating $200,000 or $300,000. And then that means that that can be spent because of the budget that year. And if we need to appropriate anything differently, it would come back through an amendment of the budget. So this is an earmarking of $1 million, and the appropriation is through the annual budget.
That's right. And this year we have sufficient money in our budget, so we're not asking for an amendment to the budget. for this current year that we are in. Next year, we'll ask for that appropriation.
So so from current budget, what would you view as how much we've appropriated of this $1 million in this current budget?
I think we estimated that we had collectively between the legislative and regulatory group, the power supply group, and some of the programs group, we had sufficient to fund about $300,000 in consulting services. So each of us has a line item in our budgets related to consulting, and when we combined them, we saw $300,000 that we could use towards these consultants.
Okay, and so then the budget, when we do budget reviews or we look at the financials, we will be able to see a line item that is affiliated with this earmarked funds and see how, and track the actual expenditures.
Right.
Is that correct?
And if this year we go above 300,000, we'll be back to you.
Yeah, we can't spend what we don't have.
Okay, any other questions or comments before I call for a vote? All right, can I get a motion, please? A motion to adopt the resolution to authorize the chief executive officer to execute service agreements. And I need a second?
Second, would the friendly modification that there be reports biannually?
Okay. Everybody good with that? I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? And it passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item, number 4, is an overview presentation on the building design incentives and REACH codes. I believe this is going to be made by Don Bray. Hello and welcome, Don.
Good evening, directors. And, tonight we're going to, get the logistics sorted out here. Okay. So as you know, carbon emissions from the built environment represent about 30% of all the emissions in our inventory across SVCE communities. And virtually all buildings in our region use natural gas for heating of water, heating of air. And looking forward, if we're going to encourage electrification, use of clean electricity in place of natural gas, design incentives and REACH codes represent a major lever that we can use, one that really uniquely Community Choice Energy Agency can work with member agencies to adopt. So this is something we really want to look at as a mechanism that has a lot of potential for us. It's not that easy either. Adopting REACH codes takes working it through your council. It takes stakeholder input. So this is something that we want to approach very thoughtfully and very carefully. I'm going to be going through a series of slides here. I'm going to try to stay at a high level, but your questions might be detailed. So I'm joined here by John Supp and Amy Bailey. They are the panel of experts. Any hard question goes to them. But we've all been working on this from some different angles, so I'm hoping that we can make this a good collective conversation. Okay, so in discussing this topic, we want to touch on several important and related items. Firstly, why is natural gas currently the predominant source of energy for heating? We want to talk about the market status of all electric technologies. A lot of these are newer, and adoption is early stage. What methods do we have to help influence choices that customers in our service territory make? What in the heck is a REACH code, and how does it relate to the building code? What are the steps in developing and implementing a REACH code? And lastly, what do we need to do next? What's the immediate call to action? So why has natural gas been the standard for heating in California? Historically, it's really been the best of two available options. If we look at the top row here, the way things predominantly work today is natural gas is distributed through pipes, through our neighborhoods, to water heaters or space heaters in our home. There's some loss along the way, and then when that natural gas is converted to heat, it does so at about a 60% efficiency. If you combine that, the overall efficiency, you can see there is about 58%. Typical water heater usage, for instance, is about 235 therms a year. That represents about 1.25 metric tons of CO2 per year. That's kind of an average household amount. The alternative would be burning that natural gas at a centralized power plant, running electricity across the wires. There's some loss there, of course, and then converting that electricity to heat in a resistance water heater. And that is fairly efficient. A resistance water heater is kind of like your toaster. It's a technology that's been around for a while, but it is efficient at imparting heat to water. In this case, though, the overall efficiency is about 45%, so not as efficient as what you see above, and the associated emissions are higher. So in the new world, we have the same predominant system on the top row, of course, but what's new is that we can now generate electricity from renewable and carbon-free sources. So we don't have to use natural gas anymore. There's the same loss across the wires, and then we can use new technology for heating that relies on heat pump technology. And heat pump technology takes electricity and then draws heat out of the environment. So it's a trick, but it winds up being very efficient in terms of electricity turning into or transitioning water and heating it. Overall, that's about a 282% system efficiency if you're looking at the energy input relative to the energy that winds up heated in the water. And there are no emissions from this because the source of electricity is clean. So we really have a far better system here using renewable energy and heat pump technology. So the challenge, though, is that that natural gas is the incumbent. It's what people know, it's what the building industry knows, and a lot of the technologies that support electrification are newer. We list a number of those here, and if you look at, say, for instance, grid-connected thermostat, that's important in an electrification concept. It's an available technology. It's quite affordable, but a lot of customers still don't know about them. And for all of the advertising and everything that Nest and its competitors have done, it's still only probably 15% implemented in our service territory. And that's a good example. If you look at heat pump water heaters, if you go to your friendly Lowe's or Home Depot, it's very difficult to find one. They really aren't even available there. They're quite affordable if you deploy them, particularly in a new construction context. So there's a business case there, but customers don't know about it, and they're not widely adopted yet. So we have a big education and adoption challenge ahead of us to move the market from this traditional reliance on natural gas to electrification. In terms of ways to do that, we can focus on education, we can focus on motivation or incentives, we can focus on requirements, and in reality we're probably going to have to do all of these. Tonight I'm going to concentrate our discussion here on financial support and floor area bonuses. These are incentive structures that we've seen used. And then we want to talk in particular about reach codes as an alternative. There's some time pressure on us reach code wise, so I really want to make sure that we're concentrating the discussion on that. So firstly, financial support, basically cash incentives for all electric design. This is something that we can potentially do. If you look at Sonoma Clean Power, they have an incentive in place right now for all electric construction. This is due to the wildfires that were up there. There is a lot of reconstruction going on. And they'll pay between $7,500 and $12,500 per home if the homeowner commits to building all electric. So that's an interesting example of a cash incentive. We've been thinking about this in the context of design grants for showcase homes. So we wouldn't necessarily do this for everybody, but we might allocate some amount of money for some number of homes in our service territory that would be built all electric, and we make a lot of press out of that, and we use it to help educate the community more broadly. On the commercial front, PG&E currently operates a program called Savings by Design. Its principal focus historically has been efficiency, but we could do a similar thing around all electric. They offer up to $150,000 for commercial projects to support efficiency. We could do a similar thing to support electrification. So we'll be bringing some ideas forward in our program planning on this notion of all-electric design incentives. Another approach is development bonuses, and the city of Sunnyvale has done a very good job with this. Historically, they've offered a floor area bonus on the order of 10 to 20% for developments that have been built to a certain LEED standard. And I think this started out in one highly developed or developing area of Sunnyvale and has since been broadened. But the uptake has been terrific. I mean, developers see a huge value in this bonus. It doesn't cost money per se, but it's producing a very desirable outcome. So they're currently looking, the city of Sunnyvale, at adding electrification into that floor area bonus concept, so that a developer would get the additional bonus if in fact they commit to building all electric. It's another example of an approach that can be taken. So these two, the development incentive and then the cash incentive, are just that. They're incentives, they're not requirements. A REACH code takes this in still a stronger direction. I'll describe a REACH code in the context of the building code. Important to understand how the building code works. Every 3 years, the California Energy Commission releases a new state building code, and it's known as Title 24. And all buildings in California have to be built to this standard at a minimum. And when the codes are released, the cities will then adopt that code to become effective as of the beginning of the new code cycle. So we're currently in the 2016, or on the 2016 code. The 2019 code, as it's called, has now been developed and I believe is pretty much approved. The 2019 code becomes effective January 1st, 2020. So it's a little confusing, but we'll be talking about the 2019 code. It's actually effective January 1st, 2020. And historically, the code has been very much, in California at least, has been very much about energy and efficiency. It really has not been about carbon emissions. So that hasn't been a consideration really on the code. Now, a REACH code is something that a local city can develop and adopt, but it must be more stringent by definition than the state code. The measure has to be developed. It has to be, and there's some engineering that goes into it, because it needs to pass a cost effectiveness test, and then the code also needs to be approved by the California Energy Commission. And approval is a fairly mechanical process that goes pretty quickly. This isn't a multi-year process, but there is definitely a process that you go through to officially ordain a REACH code. The city then typically implements that REACH code at the same time they're implementing their new building code cycles. So if SVCE, city or cities, wanted to adopt REACH codes, it would be best to do it effective January 1st, 2020. Hence the need for urgency here. So we have to, if we're heading down this path, we have to work on developing the REACH code now and work on stakeholder input and working it through cities and so forth, get it to the Energy Commission by the end of summer, early fall for their ratification, and then it would become effective in January. Here's an example from Marin, and this is associated with the 2016 code, but they did increase the energy efficiency requirement for mixed fuel homes, and mixed fuel means homes using electricity and natural gas, which is most all homes. They increased the efficiency requirement under Title 24 by 15%, but all electric homes could meet Title 24 as it currently stands. So in a sense, they worked to tilt the playing field a little bit in the direction of all electric. So this code is in place now in Marin. As we're thinking about this, we're thinking about the possible development of REACH codes and maybe a couple of flavors, such that a jurisdiction could adopt a lighter green REACH code or a darker green REACH code, depending on what works best in your respective city. So lighter green could mean making a building all electric ready. In a sense, putting a 220 volt plug and the associated wiring at the stove location, at the water heater location, at the furnace location, so that electrification would be easy to do down the road if the homeowner wanted to go that way. Darker green might be doing all that make ready as well as actually deploying the all-electric technology. There's also an opportunity to incorporate EV codes. Those are done separately to the Title 24 process, but we could incorporate additional EV charging requirements as part of this as well. So this is the technical work that would need to happen early next year to develop these codes, and then they would be brought through the adoption process. In terms of SVCE's role versus a city's role, we could take the lead, for instance, on a design incentive. The money could come from us. We could develop the program, but we would need the cities to engage with it and support it. In terms of a REACH code, the example out on the end, ultimately that's going to be the city's job to actually adopt that code, to take it through the council and adopt it. So we can support it. We could support the development of the REACH code, but there's going to be, we're going to have a receiving team at each of the cities, or the cities that are interested in doing this, to make it a reality. So in terms of what we're currently doing, Amy's been in discussion with Peninsula Clean Energy. They're looking at the same thing, and we're talking about, if we head down this path, that we could share a consultant in terms of developing the REACH code, which is a good leverage opportunity. We've had multiple conversations now with the member agency working group where this has been well received as a concept. They freely acknowledge that it isn't just them, that we will need to reach out and engage the building departments in the respective agencies. So there's still a lot of work to do in terms of engagement with our member agencies. But this idea has been well received by the MOG. We've had experts in talking about the technical details of REACH code development. Those conversations have gone on for hours, and next time we'll bring that presentation. That's the 101 level. And we've started conversations with various city staff in terms of their thinking on this. But tonight we'd like to hear what you have to think about this, maybe what your experience has been in the past, how we could best support this this initiative if we decide to take it forward collectively. I mentioned timing. Probably the key milestone here is that we have to get the REACH codes adopted by the cities by the end of the summer so that those REACH codes can go to the Energy Commission where they're reviewed and approved so that they can be actually made into effect as of January 1st, 2020. So we'd be on a fairly tight timeline here. So in summary, REACH codes are a major lever for moving the market towards all-electric, zero-carbon construction. If we think about how many buildings will be built over the next 3 years, if we said even 1% of our buildings were going to be rebuilt, that's 10,000 buildings that'll be built over the next 3 years. If we don't take steps like this, a lot of those buildings are going to be going in with gas piping. They are going to be producing emissions for the next 80 years. So, you know, this is something we need to think about. If we miss this opportunity, it's another 3 years of gas infrastructure that's being built. We'll be bringing a formal proposal on this, subject to tonight's conversation, along with the program's roadmap, and that would be to get a consultant started and really begin the stakeholder engagement process. We're also looking to do a webinar and begin to engage building departments, key staff within the cities on this as soon as next month. And we'll need, of course, champions on the councils to take this forward. So that's it for the presentation. I'd like to open it up for questions. Make sure you ask some hard ones so that we can engage John and Amy.
Don, before I open it up, can you go back 2 slides, please? I just want to make sure we all understand the timeline that you're talking about. Okay. Stop. Right there is perfect. So in my town, I seem to remember that we vote on adopting the California building codes in June or July of the year prior. So if they're being implemented in 2020 January, it seems like the timeline is actually much shorter than what you're suggesting here, that we would need to vote on it in my city certainly by the end of August from memory, and I admit I could be wrong, but I'm getting a couple nods down here, so I think the timeline is pretty short.
Well, that timing is exactly what we show on here. So maybe I wasn't clear in how I stated it, but the local review and public process, that is taking it through the cities, and yeah, we've understood from our discussions with folks that the timing you described is fairly typical of cities.
So what happens if one city chooses not to pursue this and 12 others don't? I'm just trying to understand the big picture here. Do we need to go as a group in consensus, or are you expecting here by one off here and there, and then publicly shaming the rest of us who don't participate?
Those who don't participate, we just build in their city only.
That's good. Okay, good.
Yeah, you know, ultimately this is going to be a city-by-city decision. Also, I think we talked about the lighter green, darker green. Mm-hmm. There could be some options, and there can be a mix in between those. I mean, I think if we do this right, we should be able to come up with a few alternatives that every city can look at and figure out what works best for them.
Sorry for monopolizing the first set of questions. Who'd like to go next? All right, Rob, then Nancy, Margaret, Jeannie. Sorry.
So I'll start off with comment and then question, maybe backwards, but I really like this. I've already sent it to my town manager and said I want to get this on the work plan. And so the comment is, in Los Gatos, we do our work planning in February for the rest of the year. So before February is when, you know, probably in February the council members will vote, but you need to get staff sort of supporting it and describing it and so forth before that. So I immediately took your presentation and sent it to her and said, you know, can we get this on our list of potential work plan? Then my question, and it's maybe it's a nitpick, but it's bugging the heck out of me. I don't understand how you have a system efficiency more than 100% in your early slides. Either you've changed the laws of thermodynamics, or you've redefined things that sound like you're cheating?
Well, I would love to answer that question, but I'd also love to involve John and Amy. And I think Amy's background is in physics, so she can't answer this.
So she has changed the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah, so you're paying attention to the numbers on the slide. That's great. So a heat pump works. It's actually a thermodynamic cycle that extracts heat from one medium and moves it to another medium. And the most common example that everyone has here is a refrigerator. And in that case, the heat pump in your refrigerator is extracting heat from the inside and moving it basically to the back of the refrigerator that's vented. And so it's over 100% because it's using air that's, using heat that's available from the ambient air, which is renewable heat. And so that's how it's able to achieve above 100%.
So there.
Yeah, it's not a closed system. It's taking energy from somewhere else as well. So that's, yeah.
Right. The second thing I wanted to kind of ask about, and it probably is too far in the mud, but you talk about the system efficiency of the gas line at 97%. Does that include losses of the gas leakage, or is that just to pump the gas? And the reason I point that out is there are most likely leakage issues of a greenhouse gas that's 72 times worse than carbon dioxide. So I've heard terms like a 2% leak in gas is the same thing as if we just use coal to create the electricity. And so I'm wondering if that includes a leakage factor in there also.
Yes, and we've heard numbers as high as 5% for leakage. I think there was a fairly recent study, and somebody would need to help me here, but perhaps done in the city of San Francisco, looking at leakage, and it's significant. So that 97% is probably a leakage number plus what it takes to
It's probably way undercounting if you consider since what we're really worried about is greenhouse gases, it's really undercounting the effect of if a lot of that is leakage.
Yes.
So I know it's in the mud, but I wanted to add that.
Nancy, I believe you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I love the report. I think this is great to push people for REACH codes. One little nit I have, of course, is that I think that you need to do more with doing electric production of hydrogen for the hydrogen vehicles that are going to take over as a hydrogen driver. I always note that. Okay, I'm kind of teasing about that, but yeah, he knows what I'm talking about. So anyway, to the point, you mentioned Marin has some experience with the REACH codes, and I wonder if you have any information to share about what their results were with that. Were they able to measure percentage of new construction that's been all electric versus mixed?
Yeah, hi, this is John Supp, Account Services Manager. So we're aware of and know the code that they created. As part of our formal proposal, we would include the results of how it's worked for Marin. We just don't have that data at this time, but yes, that is definitely going to be part of the plan to provide to you all.
Okay, yeah, that would be really, really informative. So I'll look forward for that, and thanks for the efforts. I think this is great.
Margaret.
Thank you. Maybe this is going to next steps, but I guess my question is, I'm trying to understand this better, but is the ultimate goal to get every city to do a REACH code, or are you looking for these options and the cities to adopt one of these options or several options? What is your ultimate goal?
In a perfect world, every city would adopt dark green.
Right.
I mean, that would be a perfect world. Honestly, it's editorializing a little bit, but every city is going to be different. And if we make significant progress, if we have a significant number of cities adopting a REACH code of any kind, it's a heck of a statement. I mean, this is, again, PG&E or an IOU wouldn't be doing this. I mean, this is really, would demonstrate the power that a community choice energy agency can represent in terms of transforming our built environment and really addressing fundamentally the GHG equation. So the more the better, of course. But we think it's important to get moving on this and have a good show of support.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to editorialize on that too. Just to bring us back to why we were formed to, it's all about decarbonization. This is the heavy lift when we get into the built environment, and we're also talking about mobility. And if you see what has happened in the last 9 or 10 months in the public sphere about how, say, PUC commissioners and other influential stakeholders talk about CCAs, actions that we have taken, like the solar storage contracts, that's proof that we're doing something different and moving the needle. This would be something amazing too.
Yes.
We are the energy arm of all of your cities. And so this is a big deal. And this closing window of opportunity that we have is what kind of makes it urgent. And you know, the last bullet that Don had was, we need champions. And so the ask that we have of all of you is to seed this idea in your city councils with your city managers, and I'm doing the same by reaching out to your city managers to see if we can get this going.
I have a couple more questions. Have you reached out to the developer in the world, the builders? Like, what is their reaction to something like this?
Yeah, this is John Supp again. We have just to a few. Okay. One of the things that we become, that we're well aware of is when the original announcement about the new energy code came out, where solar became mandatory, that came along with it a lot of feedback from the real estate industry, the Building Industries Association, acknowledging that would actually, by requiring solar, is going to increase the cost of a building. Okay. And so as we're thinking about all of this, and I think as you all are thinking about this, we have to be very conscientious of how do we use this as an appropriate lever without putting too much of an undue burden right back onto the home buyer. And so one of the things as we've been going through this and modeling it, one of the interesting things that we've discovered is in the CEC's analysis of this, it appears that they used a mixed fuel building. Well, if we encourage more electric buildings, it's possible actually that the developers would save the, on average, $7,000 that they're normally paying to get a gas hookup to these new homes. So yes, while the new code is, again, would be putting that higher cost burden by asking them to add solar, if they actually then in turn look at all electric, they might turn right back around and not really suffer the full impact of that by reducing that gas line. We do need to socialize that with more of them and get their input as to how real and how impactful that is for them. But at least we see sort of that silver lining in that cloud. So yeah.
Are we doing comments or?
Well,
or
we're gonna have,
okay.
Yeah, we'll bring it back after
right.
public comment.
Thank you.
Jeannie?
So I think this is an exciting kind of thing. So I have a couple of questions. First is, have we done any sort of inventory to see whether or not any of the cities that we serve is actually doing some sort of, or some variant on, you know, these REACH codes, where the cities are adopting something above and beyond, or is everyone just still at the basic level of standard codes?
We didn't study this intensively. Of course, we ran it through our member agency working group, you know, multiple times. What we were hearing about was more in the incentive vein. So the example I gave of what Sunnyvale is doing with floor area bonuses, I believe Mountain View has a similar type of concept in place. Perhaps other jurisdictions do too. I think the levers that have been pulled to date have been more about incentivization than necessarily REACH codes, but we haven't really answered that categorically. I'm not aware of certainly an electrification REACH code that's out there.
Yeah, okay, And so the thing is, when I look at this, there's something that I'm a little bit concerned with. I mean, I like the idea of trying to move forward with this, but when we're sitting here in a housing crisis, okay, and you think about what our state legislatures are wrestling with, and just a very recent example of a conversation with Jerry Hill, okay, where the city of Mountain View asked a question about, you know, as we're building all this, increasing our housing supply, encouraging all this density, giving the city's elected something to hide behind. It's not our fault the state's making us do these density bonuses, okay? We asked about, well, yeah, if we start becoming wildly successful in building the housing inventory that is actually needed, the first thing, well, one of the things that gets really heavily impacted are our schools. Clearly there's our roads, but I'm going to forget that one. I'm going to deal with the schools. And so, you know, is the state legislature kind of looking ahead and looking at how do we raise the amount of money that has to be contributed to the schools? Because right now it's very low. And I tend to been known to describe it as you do this big development and the schools get enough fees to build a bathroom, but the last time I checked, you don't educate 30 kids in a bathroom because the fees are so low and the cost of land, the cost of development is so high, it's disproportionate right now. And Jerry's response to that is, yes, but we have a fundamental problem right now, and that is cities have control of some, I mean, the state can do that, but the city also has controls of fees. And what we're seeing is that, you know, if a neighboring city is jacking up their fees, then all of a sudden another city may be sitting here going, well, wait a minute, you know, Mountain View is getting this much in terms of fees. Gosh, in Los Altos, maybe we should up our fees because clearly you can do this. But as everybody starts moving all these levers independently, and now if we're sitting here doing reach code that also adds to cost of development, it's all working counter to the fact that we really need affordable housing, okay? And so I think we have to make sure we're doing this whole thing with a lens of the unintended consequences potentially as some of this starts becoming additive, which is why I think, you know, when you use examples like the city of Sunnyvale, where, you know, it's kind of like saying we have a reach, you know, we want, if you go all electric, we'll give you this incentive to try and allow the developer to pay for it through adding more, you know, marketable space, right? So I think we have to make sure we're looking at this holistically in that whole context, and again, particularly right now with our housing crisis. So I think on here, when you talk about the reach, you say must meet cost effectiveness test. And I think part of that cost effectiveness test is not only long-term, but actually how does it start having a negative impact on our ability to build housing, okay? And I think housing is slightly different than in terms of building, you know, office buildings, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that we're cognizant of whether or not we're adding to the cost of housing development while we're in this crisis mode. But I do like the program, so we're saving comments for later.
Okay. Rod, then Tony, back to Nancy for one more. If there's no one else, I'll then open it for public comment. I do have 3 speaker cards.
So I shared Jeannie's concern. I was in the same meeting with Jerry Hill at the Cities Association. Have we reached out to the planning directors in our various cities to get their input on what sort of timeline would work for them to do this? I mean, it strikes me that the timing is, if we are going to do something by mid-year with all the outreach and the noise that we'll get, every time in my city we propose to do anything to the real estate industry, the BIA shows up. And so I'm just wondering if we've done.
No, it's a critical next step.
Thank you.
Really.
Okay.
Yeah, so we note on here that we would want to organize a webinar, you know, some sort of aggregate outreach for the December timeframe. If there wasn't any emotional support here for this idea tonight, we probably wouldn't have bothered with that. But your point's well taken, and the member agency working group, which is largely sustainability focused staff, they really want to see this happen too, and they're offering to get us connected with building department staff, and yeah, critical step.
So if I may add to that too.
Sure.
I'm meeting with various city managers and pitching this to them. And my ask of them is to have a meeting with the planning director, chief building official, sustainability person together. I've also reached out to the cities association, asking if I could make a presentation to the sustainability committee and hopefully bring it at least into the priority list for the cities association in January. I've also reached out to the city managers association, asking if I can make a presentation, basically a similar presentation, to get that awareness up in each of these groups.
Yeah, so the only one I would add would be the planning folks directly, because they have to deal with these questions all the time, and you know what happens when we put additional requirements on. But yeah, the pushback from some is going to be, my God, we have a housing crisis. How the heck could we put another requirement on at this point? But I think it's worth pursuing this. The other question I've always had on these programs is have you consulted with the Air District's Climate Tech Office, the folks that are looking deeply at some of these incentive programs? We got a grant recently from them, right, to jumpstart some of our programs, and I wondered if you've checked in with them about what measures they think would be most effective. We received a presentation in the last month that graded a whole set of these alternatives for climate impact, you know, dollars per ton of carbon reduced. And I think it makes sense to check in with them and see, okay, if we have a short list of things that would really make a difference, you know, does our list agree with theirs? And if not, can we match up and see what makes sense? I just think it would make a lot of sense to get on the same page there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
Tony.
Yeah, I might end up repeating some of the things that have already been mentioned by my colleagues here, so forgive me for that. But what I'm concerned about is a timeline that we have here, and as already been mentioned already, we already have staffing in our different organizations that have their work plans already set, and we're in our budget process coming up fairly soon. So adding something that's a heavy lift like this, and maybe shedding some more light on the type of support that you might be able to offer the agencies would be important as we take that back to our various management staff to explain to them, here's what's coming. It's not all on you. Here's how SVC will help with that heavy lifting, because it's going to be a heavy lift. You look at Milpitas, for example, with all the development that we have going right now, adding yet another thing on top of what we already have going on in the building department and our planning department could be something where folks shy away from, even though this is really a great idea to bring forth. So maybe, I don't know if you can do that here, or maybe you want to do like a kind of like around the way and meet one-on-one with the various cities and really discuss your support level, because I think that's going to be very, very important for
So I'll actually ask Amy to address this point. We have been, again, in conversation, preliminary conversation with PCE, Peninsula Clean Energy. We've talked about jointly retaining consulting services, and part of that scope would be very much focused on the steps that you just described and supporting any and all member agencies that are taking this through the process. But maybe Amy can comment further on that.
Well, yeah, I think that was a great summary. The purpose of the consultant that we'd bring on board is to really help add that additional capacity, in addition to the technical depth that they're bringing, given their familiarity with building codes. And so, for instance, one component of the scope of work for that sort of consultant would be to actually lead the development and organization of the stakeholder meetings that bring together the buildings folks, the architects, city staff, any interested stakeholders. And so they would be largely coordinating that and leading that and developing kind of the recommendations resulting out of that. Another kind of component of their contribution would be during the review and adoption process. If member agency is looking to take this to their city council, that technical consultant would be available during that process. And so for the contract, what we envision, similar to a utility rate, there'd be kind of a fixed cost component where they lead the stakeholder development meetings, lead the development of one or more different model codes. And then the variable cost would be, given the number of cities that are interested in, they would be providing support to those cities. And so for PCE and us, we would be splitting those fixed costs as opposed to both spending the same amount. And then we'd each be, spending the additional funding to help provide that additional capacity to our own member agencies.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, thank you. The other thing I wanted to add a little bit there too is along the lines of the REACH code and really ensuring that, and maybe asking the question more of what are the consequences if we don't get a REACH code in place by next year? Because I think it's really important that as a group we remain united on that, and it would not be right for one agency to have adopted the REACH code, whereas everyone else, maybe the other 11, are kind of standing on the outside. And I understand the push to try to get this in, but maybe it's something we consider really trying to, as member agencies and through the MOG, for example, uniting around the REACH code first. And then I know that's going to take some time, uniting around the REACH code first and then looking to see the next year that we can get this in. So I guess that's my comment, but then the question then too is what happens if we don't get a REACH code passed and ready for September of 2019? Are we done, or can we look to get it in the following year?
So the rule of thumb on this and why it is generally viewed as so important to incorporate REACH codes at the same time that you move to your latest version of the code, so at the same time you adopt the 2019 code, is that it's already difficult to be managing construction against 2 or 3 active building codes. I mean, again, it depends on when plans were approved. But you've got a building department that is building under the 2016 code, probably still under the 2013 code. And if they're moving to the 2019 code, and then there's a 2020 revision which tacks on some additional requirements, it's confusing. So in the interest of simplicity, the general approach, and it's not a mandate, it could be done differently, but the general approach has been to, generally preferable approach is to incorporate the REACH code at the same time that you move to a new building code in the city.
May I answer the second part of this question, which is, should we figure out a consensus with the MOG in terms of REACH codes before we bring it up? I think we're taking a different approach, which is providing options, because not every city may be primed to move at the same time. And if we look for unanimity, we'll probably go to lowest common denominator. So we'd rather give options of dark green and light green. And maybe we'll have 4 or 5 cities that actually meet the deadline and are able to adopt something, and then
the shame campaign.
The shame campaign. And the consequence, then the last part of your question in terms of consequences, it's 3 years worth of buildings that come in that have natural gas. So part of the goal that you've provided us is to bend the carbon curve, and it's iterative. So we've done about 20% with electricity. The next tranche is going to come from building codes and transportation. So if cities don't meet those, we're not going to be able to meet ours. So I don't know if it's a consequence, but it's an impact.
Okay, I think Nancy had one more follow-up, and I know Liz wants to say something. So Nancy, is yours?
Mine is not brief. I'll try to keep it brief, less than 3 minutes.
Would you please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
To the point of making everybody march to the same drummer, I wish that would work with, say, something like the minimum wage, where we're all over the map. And I would adore having a reach code for that and say 16 by, 2020 while we're at it.
We tried it.
So I think.
We did.
Some did. We didn't get the whole county.
So, but that's a topic for other conversations. But to the point, I think that the cities move at their own pace. And maybe one thing that would be illustrative is to take a city such as Sunnyvale, who has made some progress with, that has been mentioned by staff here. Perhaps we could take more of a let's all help each other approach and share best practices at the MOG, because I am quite sure Sunnyvale staff would be delighted to share their, the text of their building codes and just hand them over to city staff from other cities and make it as easy as possible about what's worked for us, and things like, in the interest of helping each other meet these goals. And one thing that I wanted to touch on was something that Director Sinks mentioned, is this Future Fit grant that we got, which is $325,000 plus a match. And I understand that that'll be happening maybe spring of next year. If we could maybe somehow tie in that opportunity with this idea of a reach code, that might be a way to raise awareness of the possibilities of heat pump water heaters and heat pump space heating. And to that point, I wanted to mention that Sunnyvale is having a study issue at 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 27th about encouraging people to switch from their current systems to the new heat pump and space heating options. And I think that one message that could come out of that is how much easier that is to accomplish with new construction. Just saying, it's a lot easier and cheaper to do it when you start construction, irregardless of if it's affordable housing or not. Any construction would be a lot cheaper and easier to do it if you planned for it. And to that effect, I do want to thank staff for our CEO here for coming to Sunnyvale on October 30th. And when he spoke about that grant, I had members of the public who were interested. And one of them said that that's too long to wait, and she's going to come to my house if her water heater doesn't last that long to take her showers, because she wants this heat pump water heater so bad. She's going to come to my house to take her showers. So I think there is a demand. People care. They want to do something. I think there's actually more support for it than we might be aware of, just sitting where we're sitting. So thanks.
Okay, Liz.
So I'm trying to follow the discussion here. I was going to hold some of this back for discussion as opposed to questions. But so as an architect, this obviously is near and dear to my heart, and I'm more than thrilled. But also, as some of you know, I'm on the AIA National Strategic Council, and we get a lot of training on how to understand and predict new ideas and what to consider about them. So I'm going to try and apply some of that approach and knowledge to this. So I think we've had a lot of individual really salient points here. One is that we have to be aware that it has to get on a work plan, okay? That's a huge deal for every one of us, okay? Takes 3 council members or 4, depending on your city, to get it on the work plan. Okay, that's a heavy lift in and of itself. Okay, so we have to understand that. One of the questions that Garesh can ask the city managers when he meets with them is going to be how can we get this on the work plan? Because frankly, the city managers have to buy into this. Also, another point was what Nancy just said. What's already out there that could be shared? Because one of the things that you're talking about is writing a sample ordinance that could be shared or tweaked, and there's two of them, the green and the dark green. But someone else asked what's been already done in the way of these REACH codes. I've actually never heard of the phrase REACH code, but that's okay. When green and when energy became an issue, many cities, before the green code was adopted into the state building code, many cities adopted Build It Green or LEED. So cities have done this as an addendum. It was never easy to do. There's a lot of pushback from primarily developers and homeowners that are going to have to absorb the cost. So we cannot miss the comment about what it's going to do to the cost. And one of the things, the classic unintended consequences. I mean, so one of the trade-offs with the solar would be if you're in being provided 100% carbon-free energy, maybe you don't have to do the solar if you go all electric. So if you take off a cost to add a cost kind of thing. So there's big things like that that need to be looked at. I thought Tony's comment was very much up there. What's the backup plan? And someone else, maybe Nancy, someone said, what can we do easily? Okay, because the timeline, I hate to say this, is extremely challenging, and I can see a couple of hurdles. But the other thing someone else started to mention is, what other constituent groups do you need to get involved? And I'm a little concerned that we're reaching out of our own expertise here a little bit. I like that we can provide incentives, but I'm a little worried about overreaching, because, I mean, architects have to be incredibly involved, engineers have to be incredibly involved, developers for housing particularly have to be incredibly involved, and the Construction Specification Institute. All of these ancillary related industries, USGBC, they all have to be engaged and buy into this. And my concern is there with you know, the zero net energy. I'm worried about conflicts, unintended conflicts, because architects had just gone through this massive change of having to do mandatory zero net energy. So in terms of trying to ask questions, I'm just posing things that, I mean, I almost think we need to have a blank wall and just draw out all of these connections and loops and questions and figure out how we could even begin to tackle it and who might be the better group to lead certain components of it. Because this is the incentives and the goals are clearly our bailiwick. How we go about having it happen, I'm still not quite there. Not that I don't want it to. And you can do my house first.
So I do have one more question, and if no one else does, oh, okay, Steve, how about you? You go first.
I was thinking about this. We have a growth control system, and it takes 2 years from the time you make your commitments before you can actually start building, so everything's kind of delayed for new construction. So I started thinking about, how does this work for retrofits? Is this something that we can apply and make work somehow for remodels and retrofits? And I can't quite see how that works, but is that part of what you're looking at?
The general focus of this would be new construction. Again, the economics are a lot better in a new construction context. Now, where's the cutoff between new construction and, say, a major remodel? I mean, I imagine there'd be hurdle language, but although I'm not 100% sure I'm understanding your question, are you saying that projects are being delayed from when they're approved to when they're constructed? Or
I'm just saying, since we can't get our new construction turned around quickly, what can we do to maybe incent some remodels and things like that? it's not either or, but.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So maybe we step back a little bit from the REACH code and go back to SVCE's basic role. So in looking at the built environment, we absolutely see ourselves as having a role in educating and sharing with the development community, with the homeowners, what actually already works in their favor from an electrification standpoint, right? The building code already allows for all electric construction. I mean, we're not trying to introduce something that's brand new, right? But there are some things that may not be so well known about all electric. So definitely on the education side, we're absolutely, through our resource center, which you'll see being proposed in the roadmap, that education, outreach, and sharing is a hugely important piece of getting this market moving forward. The next step of that, to get them to take the next step, is where are these areas where education's not enough, right? Like there's some things that are just, God, if I just knew about them, I would do them. Okay, that's great. But there are other things where if you knew about them, but they're just not quite either cost effective or maybe just not trusting of it or you're not comfortable with it, that's where that role of sort of that incentivization comes in. And that's where that design grant or the city incentive or an award or a recognition program or just anything that's going to give them that extra boost to go, yeah, you know what, I'm going to jump in on this retrofit for a heat pump water heater. And that'll take us, again, another certain part of the way. And then at some point, whatever that thing is, maybe it's a heat pump, maybe it's an electric vehicle charger, that just becomes what the market says, oh, that's the norm. Okay. Then we can probably drop out of the incentive piece a little bit. And at that point, then it really sort of starts to fall back into the cities where it sort of introduces itself into code. You know, dual pane windows at some historic date or some wild future technology, like who would ever install dual pane windows? You know, single pane have been working for decades or centuries. So this is sort of a progression. And so we're jumping in on the education part and the incentive part for sure. But there's also this long process of how do we then get this into that, that standard practice or built into code at a future date. And so we see this as I mean, this is going to take years for this electrification, right? So how much progress we make on this cycle for the REACH code makes us better and makes all the cities better prepared for the 2022 as well. So we're not, you know, this isn't a, hey, one shot, oh, we hope we get it, and if it doesn't work, we're going to walk away. This is us taking our first steps in what is going to be a 5-10 year process of working together with all the stakeholders as well of all of our cities. That was a long answer, but I hope did I get it in there?
That was a good answer. Okay, I do have one.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, one little tack on, which is, remember, we're not suggesting that natural gas fueled construction be banned. Our REACH code just tips the playing field a little more towards all electric. Light green tips a little bit, darker green might tip it a little bit more. Yeah, so if you want to build the old-fashioned way, you still can. You're just going to have to make a little more efficient building. So, yeah, I mean, John's point's important here. This is really a first step, and it's an important first step. But it doesn't immediately mean that all construction going forward is going to be all electric and we're finished.
So I have one last question before I would take public comment. Is there any indication of when the state might start to impose some of these or incentivize individual cities to adopt some of this as part of the 3-year cycle? I would assume you don't anticipate that happening in this 2020 cycle, but is there any indication that by 2023, when this circles back around, the state may be mandating some of these changes anyway, or is that still sort of aspirational?
Maybe I'll make one comment on, Don had mentioned the 2019 building code, the statewide baseline has already been formulated and adopted as a part of that code. Pre-wiring for a water heater that is incorporated into that code. And so you're seeing a lot of progression in that direction. Not only that, but historically, the ways in which you calculate cost effectiveness for the purposes of building that building code, it has historically favored natural gas. And so, I mean, Don is talking about tilting the playing field. It's already extremely tilted towards natural gas, and we're really trying to level it. And so there's a lot happening through even just the regular statewide code process to kind of levelize that and move towards electrification.
Thank you very much. If there's no other questions up here, I have 4 cards from people who would like to make public comment. Okay, I'm going to start. One of the cards does not have a name, and I would have bet the farm that it was Bruce, but then I got a card from Bruce. So there's a 4th person out there who wants to speak, and I'm going to let you identify yourself because the other 3 are Bruce, James, and Steve. Would you like to go first, or would you like to go last? I'll give you the choice since I don't know your name.
I'll go first.
All right, come up and introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, directors. My name is Tom Cabot. I'm a longtime utility resource planner and a volunteer with Carbon Free Silicon Valley. And also in my hometown, I'm on the Environmental Quality Commission, helping to advise our council on how to make these types of decisions. I'm a big fan of your staff. I think they've done a great job bringing this thing forward to you. I've been looking at REACH codes for a while now. In the neighboring town, I helped Palo Alto out with their technical advisory committee looking at their REACH codes. Like Marin, they've adopted REACH codes already. They did their first one in the 2016 code cycle, but they did it a year late. They implemented in 2017. It is doable. You don't have to hit January 1st. It just does cause some confusion in your administration, that you end up administering several different codes for a little while. But anyway, so they've done it. Their type of REACH code that they did was a 2-path type, like Don described, and they said you essentially have to, if you build an all-electric building, you can meet the baseline code level. If you were to use mixed fuel and include natural gas in it, you have to be 10% below that level. So you have to build a tighter building or more efficient equipment than the base code. So that's how they did it. It's been so easy for them to administer that when I ask them, well, how many homes have gone this way and that way, they say, we don't even know. Any of you who've worked with Palo Alto can probably back me up on that. So anyway, that's how it's going there. But I just wanted to talk to you for a minute about the background. So the IPCC just released the report that essentially said we have to change what we're doing, and we have to change now. We have to change fast. We can't keep going at the slow pace we've been going because the slow progress has been losing. So we have heard this call to action, and then I'm really impressed with SVCEA and your ambition to bend the carbon curve, and I see this REACH code as that big tool for you. It is the thing that takes advantage of bringing all these communities together, bringing in the clean energy stepping stone and electrifying it. Then I've heard your concerns. What we saw in Palo Alto was all electric construction is not more expensive. It does not raise the cost of buildings, it lowers them. As Don alluded to, it cuts the cost of bringing the gas pipe from the street to the building. It cuts the cost of putting in a meter. You don't have to have that. You don't have the space for the meter anymore. You don't have that ugly thing around hissing at you and making smells and leaking gas. So you don't have that. Then you don't have to drill those holes in the walls to help the termites out and put all the gas pipes everywhere. So you save that expense. You don't have to drill holes up through the ceiling to let the rain in and try to get the poisonous exhaust out. So you don't have that expense. You don't have to have a separate air conditioner and a furnace because the heat pump can reverse it. It can cool you in the summer and it can bring the heat in and warm you in the winter. So you don't have that expense for separate air conditioning. And we see more and more buildings with separate air conditioning. So you save that. So there are a number of first cost savings that make housing more affordable and give people the room to raise those fees that they may want to raise to get communities services offered. So I'm seeing that there is a big synergy, and I like the idea of laying it all out on big paper and see what is the synergy. Can you make progress on it? Anyway, I think you guys have started in the right direction. I highly recommend being bold and implementing a REACH code. I actually favor mandating gasless buildings because I think of me as an advisor, a commissioner, and you guys as directors and council people, we have the fiduciary responsibility to stop people from making the old mistakes they've been trained to make. And in the building community, you build what you built last year again because it worked last year. And we're in a new territory. We need to help them change. it does a great service to just eliminate the path from last year. Let them transition to the new path. Let the buildings be built cheaper. And that way we don't have to rip it all out a few years down the road. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Bruce. Hello, Bruce. Welcome.
It's tough to follow Tom Cabot. He's extremely knowledgeable, much more so than I am about the particular issues related to natural gas. But I do have a long environmental track record. I remember back in the 70s and 80s, I was a Greenpeace donor and supporter. And I remember what a hard time the world had stopping killing whales and clubbing baby seals. It really upset the whaling and seal clubbing industries when these changes took place. And I think of natural gas as a weapon of mass destruction. If it isn't destroying homes in San Bruno, if it isn't poisoning us in the short term by leaking into our homes, it's poisoning the world that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would love to have the chance to live in. I recently spent a vacation with two of my great-nephews, ages 3 and 6, who have an excellent chance of living to the year 2100. And I would like to be able to look them in the eye and say, I did everything I could to make the world in 2100 as livable as the world in 2018. But I'm not sure that I would honestly be able to do that. This REACH code is ambitious. It may require cities to actually change their work plan on the fly. Imagine that. Imagine that in an emergency, you have to do something different than you thought you were going to do. This is a very thinkable thought for me because I actually believe that the biggest emergency that faces us is not the housing crisis, it's the climate crisis. And I envision a world where there will be a carbon tax, and anyone who's unfortunate enough to live in a building heated by natural gas will be paying through the nose a carbon tax on the order of $100 per metric ton. You know, if you have an electric house, if you have an electric apartment, and it's all environmentally friendly, carbon-free electricity, you won't be paying that carbon tax. If you're driving an electric car, you won't be paying that carbon tax. But buildings last 80 years, and if we build a lot more of them, we won't be able to retrofit them cost effectively. It's the time to build a carbon-free building is now. So I know some cities won't make the 2020, 2019 cut. I mean, some cities didn't really want to sign on to SVCE right away, but y'all got here eventually. So I'd love for Mountain View and Sunnyvale, Los Altos, Morgan Hill to be the leaders, and y'all can catch up in 3 years.
Thank you, Bruce. James, I think the shame campaign is beginning.
Hi, James Tillea, resident of Sunnyvale. A quick comment about my role as chair of Carbon Free Silicon Valley, a group that is in this county and the county above, and folks behind me are all board members. Beneficial electrification of buildings is our top priority. It's our focus, and for good reason, because that's where the next big effort needs to be. So all the rest is me for myself speaking. I support and thank the staff for working in this area. I support it because it is the next big thing that needs to be done to reduce greenhouse gases. There's the urgency of building the building and then having to retrofit it later is a much harder thing to do, so let's do it now. The 3-year cycle plays into that as well. And as both Don and Garish said about it plays into the unique value and demonstrates the unique value of a CCE and SVCE, and specifically of how this can tie in with what SVCE can do to help and work, coordinate across the member agencies. That's not something that PG&E can do. And so it's going to be a highlight of why CCEs are of great value. And it's going to be more evident the more of our state burns and the more of Florida gets underwater. You can care or not about Florida, but so as much as all of you can do, try to reframe the thoughts in your own heads as well as influencing others on your councils to reframe from why can't this work to how can we make it work? Because it ties into, as Garish said, that this is being built, there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of options. So one or more of the options should work. And so try to think positively about it instead of negatively about it, and look for the ways that it can work out. Tom gave some great examples of all those ways that it's actually cheaper to build this way. A couple of things. Retrofit, the question about retrofits came up. That's where design incentives can come into play. And as I've been working with city staff in Sunnyvale on our green building code update, it's both REACH codes and for new construction, as well as design incentives through the floor increase. And it also ties in, there's essentially one big matrix, all these different categories, and what can be done even for retrofits and major remodels. So ideally, we'd fill in all the boxes with as aggressive an option as possible, and the least aggressive, as at least in every box of every category, retrofit or new construction, we have encourage. Don't have anything less in there than encourage, because then that lays the groundwork for the next time that you ratchet it up one more. If you don't at least say encourage in every box, that at a minimum, and I want more, we need much more in many of the boxes, but at least start with encourage, so that in the next cycle you can take it one level up. I don't have much more time, and it's not an either or regarding the housing crisis. They're both things that are important, and the flexibility and options help. Let's see what else. The other thing is, as I was involved with Sunnyvale, I noticed that the staff was still including things from our original climate action plan from many years ago, like cool roofs and other things. A lot of other sustainability things are important, but it's helpful to think in terms of priorities. Electrification needs to be a much higher priority, and we can give up some of the incentives, or don't give incentives for some of these other things. We can encourage them, but don't waste the incentives, don't waste the mandatory on things that don't have a whole lot of impact. So we can give back some things and make it easier, so it's part of the trade-off thing. If we're going to ask for more, we don't need a cool roof, for example. There's a lot of little things that's like, those are nothing compared to what we can accomplish if we electrify. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve.
What those guys said. Steve Schmidt, resident of Los Altos Hills. I'm also the alternate to Chair Corrigan, and a member of the MOG, and a volunteer at Carbon Free Silicon Valley. I was the lead author of our town's greenhouse gas inventories, which we do annually since 2007. I also was the lead author on our 2 climate action plans, one from 2008 and one from 2016. This is a huge issue. I'll make 2 points. One is that really to bend the carbon curve, we have to go after the existing buildings. We have to, but that's extremely challenging. And if we don't do this first, that becomes almost impossible. Doing this first with new buildings sets the direction. Make sure the community knows this is where we're heading. Make sure the building contractors, industry knows. Make sure the supply chain gets ready for all existing buildings to move towards electrification. This is critical. My second point is that it sounds like there's a ton of support for this, but everybody's agreeing that this is going to be a real challenge. As far as I know, we've had unused program budgets for the past 2 fiscal years. We have money. What we don't have is staff time. These guys are doing a great job. They don't have time. Garish only has so much time. You guys only have so much time. Our city planners only have so much time. Our city managers only have so much time. We have money. I would suggest we could hire some consultants that do a great job putting together a glossy package for each of you to take back to your councils, for us to take to our city planners, our resourcers, and get this rolling now, not in January or February, but right now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to close public comment unless there's anyone else who is inspired after hearing our 4 other comments to make an additional one. Hearing none and seeing none, I'm going to bring it back up here. Howard, you'd like to go first? I'm happy to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak at least once, and then we'll look for providing some direction here.
I avoided questions, so I figure I use double the time. No, I'll try and be quick. So first, today I did get rid of my gas dryer and put in an electric one. It was a very challenging situation because I could not get the most efficient one because I couldn't fit it in the space. I mean, the retrofit issue is real. I've been investigating the heat pump to replace my hot water system. Extraordinarily challenging. Not only do I have to spend $500 to get a stupid 20 amp 220 circuit brought 5 feet, which had they done it when they built the building would have cost like 50 bucks. I don't have the right size ducting to make it work for the capacity water heater I need. So it's a question of, do we start cutting out walls and moving sheetrock to move bigger pipes through the house? It's actually, for an energy junkie like me, it's actually quite amazing what simple decisions could have been made when my house was built to make these options now. And I want to give a shout out to Los Gatos. They are the most forward-thinking city because that's the first REACH code that I was ever familiar with in the 90s when you guys required houses be pre-built for solar hot water. You required the piping be brought through the house so you could have a hot water heater, solar hot water on the roof. It only lasted for 3 years in your code, by the way, but I thought it was a brilliant maneuver.
Oh, wait a minute, I need more information here.
Poor Goresh got caught off guard when he found out I knew so much about latent energy and solid materials today, or yesterday. But I am an energy junkie. I love this stuff, and I frustrate myself trying to make my house more energy efficient given the current situation. This would actually benefit us in some strange ways if we were to take the bold step of banning natural gas houses. In my community, the #1 reason that people require natural gas is for that darn cooktop. And if there are some high-end and some actually very good high-end induction cooktops, but they're so far out of the mind of our supposed high-end cooks in our city that people don't consider it. And so a builder in my city is pretty much forced, if they're going to build a house, a high-end house, they are forced to have natural gas. Okay? So I could give them a square footage incentive. I mean, maybe I could make it big enough that they would say, okay, no natural gas, and then I would have people dragging propane tanks in to run their cooktops or something, which wouldn't help us, by the way. It's more about education, and it's about trying to show some leadership. I do think that on the lower end of the spectrum, an all-electric house would certainly simplify everything, and I do believe that they could be built cheaper. And in the mid-range and low end, for appliances, there are an equal number of electric options. And in fact, there are cheaper options in that range than there are for the gas options. So I do think in your 35 project or other large things, we could require all electric. I think in the single family homes, I think it would be a bold step to require all electric, but it would be a crime to not require pre-plumbing, pre-electrical for every major appliance to be all electric. I know that means probably 400 amp service panels for the square footage of the houses that show up in my city. I know it would be more electrical work. I know it would cost more because they would still be putting in the gas lines. But you can't leave the world behind where there are houses that are going to outlast our children that are like mine, which you cannot put in a hot water heater. I was at Home Depot today. Yes, they do have heat pump home hot water heaters, but you got to look through the 50 gas ones to even start talking about it. And the ones they have, I don't think are great options, but they're okay. We can't have our children stuck for another 50, 80 years, not being able to upgrade their house without spending 10 times more than the cost of the appliance just to do the upgrade. Only crazy people do that. Yeah, I probably will have to. But only crazy people do that. We need to make it so it's an option for every single person to convert. Because I'm just going to tell you, in 25 years, when kids come over to play, moms are going to look on the side of the house and go, ooh, the Joneses still have a gas meter. I'm not sure if I want my little baby Sue to play here with their kids. They're destroying the planet. Gas is not going to be in favor. Gas cars are not going to be in favor. And we need to push this forward. And as for the timing, I don't know how we make all this work in the timeline. But I certainly think that we could make little nibbles, like say you have to have every appliance in the house pre-plumbed, both ventilation and electrical, to support both types of appliances, and that wouldn't take that much work. And we should consider what it would take to ban gas for all or certain classes of building.
Who'd like to follow that? Liz.
So, I'm a split brain right now because I want to do something, and my mind keeps saying, okay, how in the world are we going to do this? So I think Howard just gave really a very good summary of what our struggle is and what our board can actually find a way to do, and the speakers to bend the carbon curve. I think the Cities Association is an organization that really has to be leveraged here because it's countywide. I think if we're going to tackle this, it needs to be the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Territory, which is basically the Cities Association with our notable exceptions. But everybody has the same goal. So I think that's someplace. Certainly need to buy into our supervisors. We really have to get some support from them. The challenge, I mean, here comes my practicalness here. I cook with gas. I definitely have cook with gas, and I also have a gas fireplace. So, I mean, these are challenges. These are emotional challenges, which we cannot ignore. If you think about the state building code, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that they've been revised to say that houses now have to be pre-plumbed for reclaimed water, right? Isn't that in the code now at the state level? Pretty sure it is. So there are things like requiring the electricity to be there. Could be done. We could start it at a local level and build momentum, but that could be easily a state code thing because there's precedent for that. We're talking about social engineering here. I mean, we're really talking about substantive. It's more than education. I mean, it's really social engineering of what it's going to be. And we're lucky we're in California. We're lucky we're in Silicon Valley because there is a mindset here. So I guess my main comment is I'm not sure we're at a point right now. I'm struggling with what we can do right now. I'm not convinced that the building code schedule that's been outlined is really that critical. Someone said it. You can do interim building codes. It happens all the time. The state school system does that. I think we could do some core things like it's very possible that we could have a sample ordinance on requiring all new construction of 50-unit or more buildings be all electric. I think that's possible. Okay, I think you might get some city buy-in on something like that. Okay, start there. I think it's possible that you could do mandatory provision for electric of appliances. I think that is a possibility. And frankly, these are the variations that cities could accept or not accept, kind of thing. So I think I'm going to say apple pick a certain different type of apple and have an ordinance that does that, and then we incentivize at those aspects. I think we could push some really out of the ballpark ideas, and then have a range of things that are sort of in the middle, and then sort of less. It's more than a green, dark green variation. It's more individual things that I think we might make doable, starting with what the 4 cities mentioned are already successfully doing. I think that's the minimum we could start with, and we could go to the Cities Association and ask for them to have a priority in the upcoming year, that we do some kind of carbon curve bending sample ordinances. And we get presentations from the 4 cities on what they've already done. And then we work with a range of things that we think we could do and support and incentivize. And then I think we could do those. I'm worried about the constituent groups that we haven't connected with yet, which are, to me, are architects, engineers, developers, the CSI, the specifiers, and the product manufacturers, and the USGBC. Those, just to name a few. I'm worried about we haven't leveraged. I think we'll get a lot of pushback, and we need buy-in. So we need to have, I'm going to say, incentivizing for these different groups, these different constituencies to buy into this. So I'm not sure if I'm being totally clear here, but I don't want us to bite off more than we can chew, but I don't want to diminish the ultimate goal of bending the curve. So if that makes sense, I think we should follow through in the conversations with the city managers. I think we should follow through in conversations amongst ourselves to get our council to see if we can get a buy-in on adding it to our work plans. I think we need to have an outreach program, consultant outreach program, that one, before the first of the year, I'm thinking, I don't know, that could pull together a summary and sample of all the existing ordinances that are the REACH ordinances that could be given to the Cities Association to figure out how to make a priority out of it. Rod, you're the president or the chair of it now, so you know this way better than I. But finding an organization whose bailiwick this big picture stuff is in, and help use this organization's expertise to move the new thoughts forward. So I think that's sort of where I'm at.
Margaret, you're next.
Thank you. So this is exciting. It's ambitious. I want to do it. It's my first reaction. I guess I've been just thinking through, well, how would we do this realistically? And my biggest challenge is time. We have council goals we do every 2 years. We'll do that early in January, February, but a lot of, like all cities, it's tied to our budget that we pass in July. And so if we were to allocate funds or staffing resources, we basically have to wait till July to do that. Sometimes we can do it earlier, but I guess I wanted to ask or see if it's kind of like shovel ready, then we could do it. And I'm wondering how much of SVCE staff you can all get it shovel ready for us to pass come July 1st or by September. So my concern here, or is who do we have to sell this to? I'm not sure. I think the public would be pretty supportive of it. It's really like the stakeholders we talked about, the developers, builders. Frankly, I'm concerned about the housing advocates because, like what Jeannie said, when we start talking about more fees and whatnot, it adds to the cost of housing, or that's the argument that's often used. And so I think we need to actually get them on board to, support this. And not look at it as a way to disincentivize more housing development. So And that's usually what takes the time, most of the time, I think, is, you know, the focus groups, the outreach, the stakeholder meetings. And so I guess my question is, you know, to staff, to all of you, like, how much of this can you guys do for our cities so that we can, you know, I'll work to get my colleagues to support this. I actually think my colleagues are going to need education on this too, and to be done quickly by, you know, come mid-January. So I'll need your support, you know, help in doing that as well. You know, I could work and get the 4 votes. I mean, I can't guarantee it, but I will work to do that. But I have to make a case that, you know, this is going to be ready to go with very minimal staff time and resources to do it by September. So, you know, that would be my request to all of you as to, you know, do you think you can do that? And what do you need to make that happen?
Nancy?
What a great segue into my question. I think it's clear that I support this, and I am kind of backpedaling from offering up Sunnyvale City staff for this, especially after a member of the public offered some funding to do nice packets to hand out to glossy, was it glossy, I think was the word? So what would it take for, so Grish, what do you think of that offer, and
Yes,
what would it take for, what direction do you need from the board to actually
I think we've
staff
got
this?
enough direction in terms of, so we're working with PCE, Peninsula Clean Energy. We're going to hire a consultant jointly. I think it'll be a powerful statement, and also in terms of really making a difference to have 34 cities have the same information at the same time on REACH codes and EV codes. PCE is going to hire the consultant. At the December meeting, we're going to bring you a cost-sharing arrangement on how we're going to share costs on this consulting contract. Based on all the comments I've heard today, timeline is a constraint, so we need to provide resources to help cities get through it. We'll work backwards from there to figure out, okay, consultant, what's it going to take to help run stakeholder processes, communication, the model ordinances, the different options, you know, more than just dark green and light green, a bit more of an array. So that's our general thought. So we'll work backwards, and we'll put in whatever resources are needed to get to that June date. So you'll see something for action in the December meeting, but it's going to be a cost-sharing arrangement with a not to exceed. That's what you'll see in December 12th.
Okay, thank you. And my only other comment is that I actually cook with a solar oven. No infrastructure needed, just a standalone solar oven and an induction stovetop. So you can actually, if you watch a cooking video on Facebook, 95% of the time they're on a little induction oven thing, or a little induction stovetop. And I actually have one of those set up, and I recently succeeded in making a very fine looking Persian crispy rice on it. So you can actually do really cool things on an induction stovetop, and I'm happy to give some, sure, why not? So come on over to my house for Persian crispy rice, and I'll show you. Great. All right, anyway, that's it. I'm very supportive, and I do believe there was some offers of some funding dangled by the member of the public, so maybe that.
Oh, no, he was saying we would spend the money.
Oh, I see. Well, he said something
he was
about
telling us how to spend your money.
unspent program. Oh, our unspent program.
Your
I
money.
got it.
Easy money.
Okay. Yeah. So our members of the public are like, there's money in the program budget. Got it. All right. Okay.
So I know Rod wants to speak. Jeannie, I have a few comments. Anybody else? I don't want to put anybody on the spot. Okay. Rod, all you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm going to, excuse me, through the clerk, through Andrea, I'm going to send a couple of things that I think would be worth our board members taking a look at. One was a lecture in this hall in October. Mark Jacobson, Stanford professor, and Amy Bailey were both here talking about electrification as a solution to climate change. And I thought it was terrific. And so it's I think, well worth your watching. And I also found the other report that I referred to earlier. It's called the BACMed Climate Technology Report, October 2018. And there's a nice table plus a lot of text, but I'll just go through a few things. For you, Nancy, hydrogen fuel cells and electrolyzers. Not bad at cost effectiveness, not necessarily easy to implement right now. So all these things are scored. Tankless water heaters, air source heat pumps for HVAC, mini split air source heat pumps, and then a whole bunch of things you can do in the commercial sector. So to this end, you know, I really think it would be important to understand if we're providing specific incentives or reach codes targeting specific devices, that we really take this into account. And I think we ought to think about carrots as well as codes, rather than talking about sticks. I like the idea of saying, you know, if you're willing to take these extra steps, we'll give you some increased density. I think that's brilliant, actually. So that really, developers can actually make that calculation and say, oh, then they're asking the question all of a sudden, oh, how much is this really going to cost me? Whereas if it's in the code and, you know, fight, because it's another thing to be paid. But if you're actually offering an incentive, it begs that question of, what would this cost me actually? And maybe Howard is right for the first, I don't know. Maybe Howard has made some good points here, which is, you know,
Los Gatos is awesome.
well, that's not the one I meant. No, you know, maybe electrical can be more efficient. What happens if in a really large mixed-use development, you didn't have to plumb gas to 2,900 homes? Could you actually, as a developer, make out better, even if maybe the operating cost was a little bit higher in the early years? Maybe you're right. Maybe there's that argument to be made. I think to the extent we can, we ought to be working with the Air District and others, and even the leaders in the building industry to go figure out how to make that case effectively to the folks that are likely to be grumpy and say no, right? But I also like Howard's idea a lot of saying we ought to be wired to go electric. So if we're not to the point yet where we have, I mean, some of these things, tankless water heaters, mini split source heat pumps, you know, cost effectiveness may not really be, may make it challenging for us to mandate their installation in new construction. At the very least, right, we ought to be thinking about what is that cost to simply get these things, the infrastructure for them designed in, to get the electrical to every one of these appliances, so that 5 years from now, when there's a change-out opportunity, it's easy to do. I think that could be a really big deal. So I appreciate your initiative, and I'd say let's think of not only what we could do with these codes, but what we could also do by inspiring the carrots, as Sunnyvale seems to be doing. I think there's some best practices that we could share, and Cities Association, absolutely. So it could be our priority for next year as well. Thanks.
Jeannie?
Trying to figure out how to organize my thoughts. So I think all of us are kind of struggling. In terms of as a project, I think this project has a lot of merit. I think it's exciting, and I do want to see us figure out how to move forward. But I think I still have some fundamental kind of questions, and one is, to what extent, if you put up that slide that has the time, okay, it says timing is critical for 2020. is that really critical? Is that what we really have to aim for? Or is that something that we're just kind of self-imposing? And I'm not sure which way it really is, okay? Because, I mean, if you sit here and say, okay, that's an actual critical date, we can't do anything outside of this cycle, and then you work the schedule back, are we really going to get what we really want and get any buy-in and get any support and get any staffing, et cetera? If that's not a critical, truly critical time frame, is it better for us to try and figure out what we can be doing, okay? And I'll give an example in that. If we have more time, the more time allows us to come up with this menu, the light green, the dark green, whatever it is, okay? But if there's an element of criticality, does it make more sense to sit here and say, what we really want is forget which particular thing you're using, but let's look at trying to, in this time frame, update what I would call the infrastructure to get us more ready. So it's not about whether we're incentivizing somebody to go, install all electric appliances, and give up your ambiance of a gas fireplace, considering how you use that one. I would die without that in my family room. That's where I get my relief after a stressful day in the wintertime. But yeah, I don't want the teen video.
With a fish tank.
Christmas time with a fireplace and the Yuletide. Yeah, thank you very much. But do we want to fast track something more like this infrastructure, saying, hey, we want to wire this thing. We need to have that electrical panel upgraded from day one, whether you're utilizing it or not, doesn't make any difference, kind of thing. Because I think then developers may decide, well, if I got to do this, maybe I'll take something to a next level. But again, that timeline's not clear to me. The next thing that's not clear to me is what is the city staff time required? Because I think without understanding that, you can go out and have conversations, and maybe I'll test with my city manager tomorrow morning. Go out and have conversations, and like all of us, I think there's a lot of excitement here. But excitement and interest and enthusiasm is totally different than
implementation.
I'm going to commit resources to this. And just speaking for my city, I can't imagine that Chris Jordan said, yeah, we're all on board, because we are short-staffed in our planning department. That's where we're backlogged, and that's where we're going to have to deal with this subject matter. So I think without having those two, I do have concerns that this is a little bit too ambitious, maybe. And I think we need a little bit more realistic understanding of that. So if you're saying next month you're coming forward with a commitment to do a fair share of a consultant, I'm going to say, I hope that you're also going to come back with something that says, hey, I got this many city managers who not only nod their head saying, yeah, this is interesting, yeah, I'm intrigued, yeah, to really say, yes, and I'm ready to commit, with my council support, I'm ready to commit resources. Because without the commitment of resources from staff, then what are we doing? Okay, huh?
That's our role as
Yes.
to direct staff.
Well, okay, so that only works up to a point in my city, okay, because, yeah, my city manager, sure, he's happy to do whatever we want, jump off of cliffs and all, as long as we're telling him what he's not doing, okay? So, but I think our city managers already, at least most city managers, already know what their bandwidth is. And that's why I said, they can sit here and say, oh my gosh, I can do this. It's going to take direction from the council because I really have to take something major off to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Again, without gauging that, you're getting I'm afraid we're going to get a lot of nods of heads. And it takes a long time. I don't think our city is unique in terms of council and their wish list and city managers with harsh reality. We can all want.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in because it's a perfect segue. Unless you're finished.
No. Sorry, so another thing that I wanted to add to this, the city of Los Altos, we are hopefully under construction next year with a whole new community center. And I really would like us to sit here and even look at how do we maybe take that and use that as a showcase or as a case study. Because, as you're sitting here, how much are you adding into costs? How much are you saving on like this? What happens if we went and really did this as a case study in terms of what happens when you go all electric In a community center, we do have a full-blown kitchen and everything in there. So it's not just a civic building without that. It's a full-blown commercial kitchen in there. So how do you do this, and how does it change the cost, up front by the time you add in appliances and everything else? So anyway, again, I'm supportive. I would like more information in terms of staff time that's a requirement, whether or not we actually, if you're asking us to support a contract dollar expenditure, do we have, and it doesn't mean every city. I mean, I'd be happy if we had a couple of cities who are saying, we're ready to run with you, and then the rest of us will follow behind if that's what's necessary. And again, is there a way to break this out? What is the time criticality of this? Does it have to be tied to this particular cycle, or is there a subset that can be tied to this, and then there's the rest of it that just comes out as time permits?
So if there are no other comments, I'll just wrap up a few with my own. I think Margaret just articulated every city's different here, and we all represent quite unique set of residents and commercial entities in our own towns, and yet we all have so much in common. So I want to be clear, just in terms of my pushback over the timeline in my town. We have council meeting tomorrow night. It's the last meeting of the existing council. The December meeting is largely ceremonial. The January meeting, I've got 2 brand new council members, and if you think they could digest what we just went through in 2 hours, so with a board of people who really are energized, excited, and somewhat educated on some of this, I think we would, Los Altos Hills, I don't want to sell us short, but we're going to need a little time here to get our head around this with the 2 new council members, just in practicality. But what I've heard here tonight over and over is much like a football team in the locker room with a very inspirational coach saying, come on, we can take this on, let's go get them, team. And I think you've got 13 teammates all standing here going, yes, count me in, until you get out to the field and you see how big and tall and hairy the opponents are. So exactly. I want to say, right, I want to say we're all on board. We want this. You have inspired us individually and collectively to find a path that we can help support the important work that's being done here for the generation that's going to live at 2021 or 2100. Hard to even get my head around that. As well as for our immediate neighbors tomorrow. We're elected to serve the people who are building houses today, as well as the ones who will live in them years and years from now. So we're inspired. I think if you're just looking for direction and discussion tonight, you've had plenty of it. We're excited, inspired. I echo a lot of what has already been said by my fellow directors. My town, I have a long history of championing ideas where we use a honey-coated carrot. I want to see a lot of incentives to get my fellow residents to be inspired to take these ideas on and challenge ourselves to do things better for the world around us. At the same time, I don't think we can just wait around. I think you've made a pretty compelling argument that we need to take action. We need to be bold. That's part of the entire fundamental part of being part of SVCE and these CCAs up and down the state. So we have an obligation to be a leader here. And I think you've inspired us. What I'd like to challenge you to do now is help us help you. We want to help, but we need this packaged in a way that Brown Act alone, I can't go find 3 votes with a brand new council until probably arguably February or March when I get to know some of the people I'm sitting with. So being really practical here, I think your timeline is short. I think committing to meeting this immediate 2020 building codes is a very large challenge. I'm not saying we're not up to it, but we're going to need a really streamlined process that's easily digested with light green to dark green ranges that allow us to bite off what we can handle as individual directors and individual cities. I'm going to close it at that unless anybody feels like they need to say anything else. Go team. Let's go. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go fight win. We'll say on 3, 1, 2, 3, go. So I'm going to move on if there's no other discussion on this item. Would the staff like to wrap up with any final thoughts or comments? No, you're good. We've beat that horse to death, I think. Gary.
Yeah, I would like to add 2 points.
Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for the wide variety of comments, inspirational, technical, strategic, tactical. They're really very helpful. Want to mention 2 things. One is you created this organization because you all had climate action plans. And you had to do something with those plans. So I love your analogy. We're in the locker room, created, now we're out here. And this is the hard work that we have to do. I also want to, all of us employees joined SVC for a reason. And I think we are also very motivated to do something. So I think all the encouragement you've given us is great. And we'll do everything we can to help each city achieve its goals, and then SVC achieve its joint goals too.
Fantastic. Okay, with no other discussion, we'll move on to the executive committee report, and I'm going to report out that there is nothing to report. I understand the Finance and Administration Committee also has no report, and the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee
has not met since our last meeting, but we are keenly interested in what we might do in the new year with the firm that we've hired this evening. So,
terrific. Are there any board member announcements or direction on future agenda items? I would like to just add one, that you'll have more detailed information at the December meeting about how we'll plan to elect our executive slate for 2019, but we're in concept proceeding with a voluntary throw your name in the hat kind of thing like we did last year. For those of you who want more information, I'll be happy to share it with you if you're new and weren't here last year. But we'll have a detailed program laid out in December so that everybody can participate as they desire. Sound good? All right. This is not. Thank you for asking though. So I do want to adjourn. As hokey as this sounds, I think all of us really in the back of our mind as Californians want to adjourn tonight's meeting thinking about our neighbors who are fighting really tough fights as cities and as individual residents and businesses. I just want to adjourn in their honor tonight. Yeah. Thank you. Good night.